For the second panel of today, the topics will be updating the international standard of accounting of the public sector 17 in the property, plant, and equipment, and Ecuador's experience with the topic assets of the state, accounting of those assets, and progress in the management of assets of the country. The moderator will be the Director General of Fiscal Accountancy of the Secretariat of Bolivia of Finance and Public Finance, Judith Marca. Good morning to everybody. We are in the last day of VIII, so a round of applause to all our hosts in Mexico. Thank you very much, Juan, and all your team. I think that you make us feel at home. In the last day, we have a very passionate topic, and as you can see, this is a panel led by women. We will be speaking about property, plant, and equipment. This panel is divided in two. In the first part, we will be listening Agustina Llambi and our colleague Kamira. They will be talking about the updating of NIC-SP 17. In the second part, we will be having our colleagues of Ecuador who will share with us the experience in the purging and accounting of assets. So let's begin. I will introduce the members. Agustina Llambi. Agustina is a manager senior in the Accounting of International Standards in Public Sector. She joined the IPSASB in March of 2022 for the work there, and she is working on property, plant, and equipment project and collaborates with the members of the task force in developing the sustainability framework for public sector. She speaks English and Spanish with fluidity and wants to strengthen the work of the members of the board with Fiscal. Thank you. Kamira, it's a pleasure to have you here. And of course, we have Kamira Sánchez. Kamira is a manager senior in the service of financial consultancy of Ernst & Young in Germany. She is a leader of projects for the implementation of NIC-SP in Europe and Latin America. And she was the continuous improvement leader of the Secretariat of Economy and Finance in the Panama Republic. She has a bachelor's degree of business administration from the University of Panama. She has a master's from the Valle de Mexico University and PhD from the University of Germany. She is a member of the Accounting International Standards Association of the Public Sector and of the International Association of Accountants. And so, without further ado, let's begin about the updating of NIC-SP 17 that referred to property, plant, and equipment. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction, Judith. First of all, I want to thank Juan and Beatriz for having invited me to this event. And this allows me to know more Latin America. I'm an accountant. I received my bachelor's degree in Canada, but I was born in Argentina, and that enabled me to speak in Spanish. I will be speaking with you in Spanish, and so I speak it with fluidity. Please be patient because I'm used to talk about accounting in English, and this is the first time that I will be speaking about accounting practices in Spanish. I have made a commitment to speak both languages very fluidly, and so I apologize if I will be speaking in English in certain words. So I will start the presentation, and I will be just moving a little bit away from the podium. Kamira will be accompanying me in the presentation. You know her very well. She is known by focal members for all the support given from her for the implementation of NEXP, and also as a member of the International Accounting Association. In the beginning, I want to say that when we talk about updating NEXP 17, we need to see that the norm of 78 also need to update NEXP 17 and not to replace it. So we will not be beginning from scratch. We will be focusing on certain changes that need to be done, and therefore we consider to replace it by some members and not updating them. But the main concepts will continue to be the same. And so what I will show to you, which are the changes that are proposed by the standard draft. And I will show you which are the decisions taken by IPSASB as from the time that they received the comments. And I want to show you where are we today. With this, I will start talking about the objective, about the standard project. This standard draft was looking to clarify the content and guidelines, specifically when we talk about the cultural and historical patrimony and the infrastructure assets, because in different jurisdictions said to IPSASB that we needed to clarify the implementation of these concepts, and the project wants to clarify the content of the guidelines and the content of the NEXP 17. So let's talk about definition. What I will be focusing on is on the new aspects or what have been improved. As you see from the definition, we haven't changed the definition of property, plant, and equipment. It continued to be the same. And it says that property, plant, and equipment are tangible assets that are used for the production of service and goods provision and to be given to third parties or for administrative purposes. And it is expected to last for more than an accounting period. So NEXP, the current and the one that we are using, excludes the scope to the artistic, historical, and cultural assets. And so the draft 78 is trying to put it as a standard. And that means that an entity needs to recognize them if they comply with the criteria that they are assets, and also that they comply with the criteria of property, plant, and equipment. So what is that recognition of property, plant, and equipment? You have been familiarized with this. Well, it says we need to recognize as assets if and only if the entity receives economic or potential benefits associated with the good or asset in question. And the cost or current value of the asset can be measured in a reliable way. NEXP 17 says that it is a cost or a reasonable value, but the draft 78 changes and says the current value. Why? Because IPSASB, based on the recommendations received by members, was that the reasonable value is not appropriate when one measures property, plant, and equipment for the public sector. Therefore, IPSASB decided to have another measurement means, that is the current value. And right now, IPSASB continues to develop that measurement basis. But I will give you some taste and flavor as for what to wait for the new NSP or when it is replaced. So I will change the slide in order for you to say what I'm talking about. When we talk about property, plant, and equipment, what is the measurement? First, we need to think, and I love to think, to start from day zero. What is day zero? It is when the entity buys that property, plant, and equipment. At that time, we are not changing the principles. So if we think what the NIC-SP 17 needing and what will be needed, the NIC-SP that will replace it, it will be the same. The cost must be of the acquisition value, the customs duties, the cost of transportation for that asset, and where that asset will be used. That is unchangeable. But if we talk about the time after the recognition, how are you going to measure the property, plant, and equipment? I think you know the cost model. That is unchangeable, and it will continue to be the same as the one in NIC-SP 17. The cost less the accrued cost and any kind of loss due to the deterioration of that property, plant, and equipment. The new part is NIC-SP 17 says that it is a reevaluation model using a reasonable value, and the reasonable value is according to the definition given in NIC-SP 17. But another project of IPSASB, that is the project of measurement drafts, and I think it's also 107, it says that the reasonable value is according to the definition of NIC-SP 13 of the private sector. And I have to tell that that is a different definition. And we have here two options. If the entity decides to measure the assets of property, plant, and equipment according to the current operational value, there are two measurement bases. The current value, that is the measurement that IPSASB is using nowadays, and we have the reasonable value, that will be NIC-SP 13 of the private sector. Before going into details about the difference of current operations value and the reasonable value and when to use each and the other, we need to show the framework after we use the assets. It is the basis of the standard 16, and the 17 is extending it. Here we have three levels: the level of model, the basis, and the techniques models. The model, it only has one measurement cost. We are working there as the same as you are using the NIC-SP 17. There are no changes. According to the current value model, we extend the measurements, and there are two measurement bases. And there is a third option, not for property, plant, and equipment, but I include in it in order for you to have the overall picture of the concept. And that is the value given by the draft of standards 76. In the measurement basis, we have the current value, the reasonable value, and the operational value and compliance value. Well, here we have the technique of market, cost, and revenues. The focus of revenues, IPSASB says that it is not necessary to have these techniques inside the current operational value. So right now we are trying to say all the members that we may take it away, but we need to determine and set forth and write accounting standards. That must be continuous until the time of its publication, and then you can change them. So that's why I say that we need to wait until the full incorporation of the NIC-SP 17. I hope you have understood my language. If not, please tell me, and I will continue to exert effort to continue being a member of IPSASB. I will give the floor to Camila. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity of talking to you about the current status of the Standard Draft 78. And thank you for the introduction. I will tell you the measurement basis. First of all, I want to thank the focal member countries because last year many of you contributed with comments and feedback about the Standard Draft project. I will tell you where are we now today. As Agustina mentioned, we have two measurement bases. One is the current operational value. That is a new measurement basis, and we are proposing it for the public sector specifically. And the definition is an asset value used in order to provide a service in the entity within the date of measurement. Based on the feedback we receive, IPSASB is improving this definition because the countries that answer said that the definition is missing some clarity, specifically that it needs to talk about the difference between the current and the reasonable value, or what is the difference between the current value and the replacement value. So now we are working on an improved definition. And the other is an improvable value. That is according to NIC 13 of reasonable value. That will be the price that will be received by transferring or selling an asset in an orderly done transaction between stakeholders in the date of measurement. Another feedback given by countries said that we needed to be specific on how the accountants need to decide on the measurement basis. We know that the public sector prefer the historical model, but many times this information is not available. So the alternative is to use the current value model. And in there, we have two alternatives. The reasonable value, but not always it's possible to apply it in the public sector because there is not an active market. So, therefore, the IPSASB has proposed to develop a specific measurement basis for the public sector. And what do we propose as the criteria to help accountants to decide on the measurement basis? Well, they are proposing to define the purpose, the entity. What is the purpose that the entity has to use that asset for the operational or financial capacity? Well, if it is due to financial capacity, is that the entity through that asset gets enough sources to finance its activities. And so it is expected that the asset, according to the financial capacity, provides a positive revenue. And also in the current operational value is that the entity keeps that asset due to the capacity of service. So that will be the criteria on the moment where we have to decide the measurement basis. What is the purpose of that asset? That asset is due to the operational capacity or due to the financial capacity and the capacity to generate positive flows of cash. Well, sometimes we don't have the black and white situation, and we cannot define with certainty if it is for financial or operation capacity. It may be an asset with a hybrid capacity. It can be used for its service potentiality and also to generate economic benefits. So in there we are discussing in IPSASB, and we are expecting to have a quick decision. Last year we proposed that we will be leaving the accountant free to use whatever. It is not so much as saying if you use the operational value of the asset and that's all. No, you can also use the reasonable value. So we have to decide if we are going to give that freedom to accountant, or we need to be more prescriptive in the standard and say it is black or white, not two. And so we will be deciding on the couple of months in the future. Another interesting decision is the fact of changing the use of the asset, because that will generate another change in measurement, because now we take as the main basis of measurement the the decision of the administration. For example, if the asset had an operational current value, we can also see the benefit of financial capacity, but there will be a change of measurement. So IPSASB is deciding if the change in the measurement basis will be produced by the change of operational capacity of the asset that will be kept in the accounting policy. That in the case of NICSP 13 will be in retrospective implemented. So another point that I want to tell you, in this slide it is written, and we are still pending to decide about it. You know that NICSP 17 is very strict when it talks about the measurement basis in a category. In fact, one paragraph says that if the entity needs to reevaluate the asset, all the assets inside in the same class need to be reevaluated. So it has always been very strict NICSP 17. So now we're considering the possibility that inside one category of assets, we can have assets measured based on the reasonable value or based on the current operational value. We're still discussing about this point. Yes, so it is on the table of negotiation, this topic. And these are the topics that we are still pending to decide upon. And now let's talk about some points that have already been decided by IPSASB. I have told you that we are trying to improve the definition of the current operational value. A couple of weeks ago, that we had the meeting of IPSASB, we have agreed on the principles for the new definition of the current operational value. The first principle is that the asset needs to be existing, available, instead of having an asset to be used in the future. No, it needs to be existing. And there, we need to measure the current use. That is the main difference between the current operational value and the reasonable value. Why? Because the reasonable value is focusing on the maximum and best use, while in the current operational value, it focuses on the current use without taking into account other alternatives of the assets used that can increase the value in the market of that asset. So here, the current operational value is of the asset as it is used nowadays, without having any hypothetical future use. And then the location, the current location. If we need to measure the value of a school or a hospital, we need to consider the possible cost of replacing that asset due to the current service given. We must not think that we are going to relocate the hospital outside the city. No, we are talking of the same current location of the asset. And another principle is the entry price. It is different from the output price. The entry price is the addition of money that uses the entity to replace that asset. And the last principle, that is less expensive, is the amount that the entity will spend to replace that asset. It must be the less costly. These are the principles agreed by IPSASB. And so the proposal that we will be giving to you in the future are based on these agreements that we have reached. Now, I will continue talking about the new contents, and that they will be definite about the new information to be revealed. As Agustina said, in this new standard draft, the assets of the historical, artistic, and cultural assets of the country are inside this standard. If the entity cannot measure the asset of the historical, artistic, and cultural patrimony of the country, well, it needs to disclose it into the financial standards and explain the difficulties it faced to measure that asset and the relevance relevance of those assets that it didn't recognize with the value of the entity. In depreciation values, we clarify that for those assets that had a useful indefinite life, the entity is obliged to make an appraisal annually if it suffered the asset any deterioration. It was not included in the NICS P17, but now will be included. And the new content in the application guidelines. Please remember the application guidelines are mandatory. And there, instead of defining which are the historical, artistic, and cultural patrimony assets, we are giving the characteristics. Well, they have some restrictions in their use and availability. They cannot be replaced, and they have long, useful lives. And we have the features of infrastructure. They must be in networks or systems, and they must have long, useful lives. And we are clarifying that for depreciation, there must be some assets in the infrastructures that are very significant and that have a very useful long life and must be appraised separately. And also, we are clarifying on how the entity defines its compliance with the NICS P17 and how it includes it in the financial statement. It must be a resource used by the entity and that it was in the previous years existing there. And then we have the content of the implementation guidelines. They are not mandatory. They are there to support the accountants at the time of revealing and disclosing their information and making accounting records. These implementation guidelines are in a format of question and answer to be understood. And so here we put a question and we ask, an entity can say that has full control of an asset continuously or temporarily? Well, the implementation guidelines say if an entity has that asset temporarily, we cannot say that the entity has full control over that asset. And we must mention the NICS P13 and that it must be used for its replacement, but not full control. And we also clarify the control of assets that are stored and not exhibited. For example, a museum that has certain work art pieces. Well, the entity can say that they have full control on those assets. The answer is yes, even though they are not exhibited. The entity will have full control over there. And also, the restriction of assets use. If those restrictions affect the entity in the capacity of measuring the asset, the answer is no. We have to consider some restrictions at the time of measuring them.
This is very important. If we permit to capitalize and analyze the expenditure afterwards, we analyze the assets that weren't well acknowledged as is before. We have a heritage that's artistic, historic heritage, or cultural heritage. There's posterior expenditure. You see the criteria, we acknowledge the criteria, and we can think about how to capitalize. We analyze if it's possible for us to manage the assets, the financial statements, the reports. We have the plans for proper administration. We have to work with indicators of when an infrastructure is worn out. Now we see the assets, measure them, we measure terrains. And to measure an asset, first, the infrastructure assets are of a special kind. There's a specific market, and it's an active market. And the control and the measurement techniques will have to focus on estimations and how to, replenish. If, in case there's a road asset, and the asset as a road has to be built by a mountain, then it's going to be measured as an infrastructure unit. Then there's insufficient maintenance of the assets. If it's insufficient, that impacts also measurements. The response is yes, it does have an effect, because if maintenance is not sufficient, that affects our measurements, because there's indicators. Maybe the asset has been affected. It can reduce the lifespan of our assets. After having said this, I finished my participation, and we're ready to receive your questions and your feedback. Thank you very much, Agustina. We thank you, Kamira, for explaining all of this information to detail. Us accountants have to assess and acknowledge and assess assets in the equipment. So we're going to listen to the Equator's experience. Ms. Magdalena Vicuña is with us. She's Undersecretary of Government Accounting at the Ministry of Economics and Finances of the Ecuador since May 18th, 2012. She's been appointed to a role, and she's been a leader in accounting disciplines. She's an economist. She's a consultant with BID projects and World Bank projects. She's an expert in budget control, treasury, expert in design and implementation of systems that facilitate management. She's also worked as a leader for the World Bank in drafting norms and standards at Ecuador, and she's also participated in the CIGEF project with the Ministry of Treasury and Finances. She's been part of many forums as the UNTARI Forum in Geneva. She's explained the financial reports and non-financial and other reports. She's developed tools such as ADT. She presided an association of public accountants and was the chairwoman of FOCAL since August 23rd, 2019 to April 2021. She's leading a project of standardizing norms, or IPSASB, with the Ministry of Finances and Economics. Welcome, Magdalena. A round of applause for her. And we also have the presence at the panel of Cintia Catota. She's an engineer in accounting and auditor, professor in finances and audit. She has an accreditation of international standards for the public sector awarded by the Charter Institute of Finances. She's also been in projects of SAP. She's a national director of the Undersecretary of Controls in Accounting and Finances. She's been appointed for that role since 2019. She kicked off a project of assets and SBA. She's part of a project in which they're adapting international standards to meet the requirements of Ecuador. She's representing her country in a multidisciplinary group called IPSASB. In April 2022-2023, she served in that role. She's been part of many forums, seminars discussing different subjects like public debt, convergence as a process, and control of assets. Cintia, Magdalena, we welcome you. Share your experiences please, what's happened in the Ecuador. We give ourselves the opportunity to ask you, as our public, to send your questions via Slido. We received these questions through this interface, and we're going to give them to our Ecuadorian counterparts later on. Good morning. First of all, I greet you all on behalf of the Ecuadorian team that was in charge of the 7th Focal Forum. We prepared that forum in a format of a session such as this one. It's beautiful to be able to be together face-to-face and embrace ourselves and open to dialogue. Due to the pandemic, we had to change the date of our calendar in the Focal Forum. All the Focal members decided to host that 7th edition of Focal in a remote setting. We achieved that forum giving our best. The 7th Focal Forum was also very successful. It was the first time that we hosted that forum remotely, so we had to go through the process of amendments of our internal law at Focal. First, I'd like to acknowledge and I'd like to thank Mexico as our host country, and I'd like to thank Juan Torres for the excellent event we've had, after these 3 years of sharing experiences. We've had the opportunity to see our teams, and I thank all of you for making this event possible. I thank international bodies. Specifically, I'd like to thank the BID. They've made our focal forums always successful. We thank the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and IPSASB, IFAC, because you've always been supporting our forum. In my presentation, I'd like to express my thankfulness to Judith for presenting me and us. Now, I'll explain what's happening in the Ecuador. My presentation has been divided into two parts. First of all, I like to say that we're here sharing the Ecuadorian experience as a case of reference and the process to adopt international standards. And Cintia will participate during the second phase. She's the Director of Public Assets. She'll explain what's happened with these assets in the Ecuador to finally formulate conciliations of these assets and also well, as I had told you, and as you saw during my presentation, and what Judith created this presentation. I worked for the ministry since 2012, so a bit over 10 years. So we had written a law that generated the amendment of the other codes. That's the Public Finance Code. Our General Act, in its wording, establishes that government accounting is going to be has to be in compliance with international law. In our regulations, we didn't have that in the wording, so it was a major challenge that I took on head on in that time frame. It was an advantage because back then we constituted another forum for government accountants in 2013. In 2013, we had that activity in Costa Rica. Then we spread to Washington, and we had other government forums in which we discussed accounting for government. And during those conferences, we shared the experience from many countries. We discussed the progress of the economies when adapting to international norms, and we had to find resources. We contacted VIII. And VIII has been sponsoring and supporting us throughout the whole process to adapt and adjust to these international standards. I want to express my thankfulness to our VIII counterparts because thanks to you, we were capable of hiring the Applied Science University of Zurich with Andreas Bergman and his team, and they've given us their full support throughout the whole process. Andreas gave us a report of gaps. There was a gap analysis. That was the second gap analysis that my country obtained. We had another gap analysis in 2014, and that did really set us back. Our score in that analysis was 0. We didn't implement any of our norms, nor the international standards. When Andreas came to us, he shared a different method, but based on the analysis that we were object of, and we received our score, we saw about laws and regulations after that. Andreas, as I've said, gave us a diagnostic gap report, and we analyzed 35 items in it. 14 of these 35 had no gaps detected. I mean, that was a reality in the other diagnostic data or report that we got. Some had some gaps, some items had important gaps, but we've been trying to correct that. Thanks to the support of VIII, Andreas has worked on following up and tracking what we're doing annually. In 2018, he visited our country twice a year. He gave us homework, reviewed our laws and regulations. During the next paid visit, he went through an assessment. He applied a quiz to all our team. It was very strict, and after the results, he gave us more homework for the next 6 months. After 2019 and amidst the pandemic, we've had to work in this project. We've worked with him remotely and with all his team. We are, with the support of the Undersecretary, we've developed a high level of expertise with our staff, thanks to the support of the professionals in Zurich University. Our government officials were trained, and by 2021, we had the right law in April, and we incorporated the majority of the norms. In 10th of August of 2022, we also adhered the rest of the norms. They're part of it, but we're still pending the implementation of these. We have homework to do. Andreas visited my country last week, and he gave us homework, as I've said, or different tasks that we must achieve in the next few months. Well, the whole process, first of all, led us to go through a formal training of the government officials of the Undersecretariat of Government's Accounting. We had to train ourselves to understand financial norms, accounting norms for the public sector, and as of now, we have certified all of the government officials of the Under-Ministry or the Undersecretariat. We're only 37. We've been trained. We've all put our jersey on and studied our norms. We have high spirits. We want to continue supporting our learning process. We drafted a training manual for different state entities to understand the budget of the state, and corporate sectors or enterprises that are not self-sustained should also implement the international accounting norms that apply from the public sector. The program is divided into modules. There's 5. We're studying the second module as we speak. But, with the pandemic, we had situations with the program. We had to train our people remotely, and remote training is not as positive in its results as the training that happens in a classroom. Right now, we have trained our people in a classroom with a budget of the state. Now, we have progressed, and Cintia will explain other subjects. We have a module of assets, the module of stock or inventory, and the government officials of the Secretariat are training others. So they're multipliers. They're using the norms, the inventory and stock norm, and they're training themselves to use the tool that's been developed for the Ministry of Economics and Finances. The requirements to be part of the convergence process has led us to see that it's necessary to see the requirements. We know that many economies or countries have to draft their law, their norm, that makes it compulsory for them to be in compliance with international standards. As I've told you, we've codified our public finances. We have the law. We have the general internal law. And the provisions, have to be in effect, as well as the international norms. So we've had to go through a conceptual, cultural change in all the public sector. We're adapting these norms for the decision-making process. We are working on the implementation of international standards. Mariana has witnessed how we've purged the accounts payable that we've had this year and past years. We have cleansed or debugged or that, and Cintia will explain the whole process. She's going to talk about the internal and external training, and obviously we're going to be talking about how we've updated our catalog of payments that has to be in conformity with the international standards. We've received full support of our authorities. The Convergence project was ratified by the Ministry of Economy and Finances, and I believe that after 10 ministry representatives or chairs of the representatives have passed, or 10 of their administrations, and they've respected that project. As a country, I think that we were at an advantage because since 2020, we were already implementing the accrued terms and the budget terms. We had back then a system that could integrate. That system was developed by computer scientists that facilitated the implementation of these international standards. And the module that we have here we've developed the system. The programmers developed the system, and in it we have the budget, the exercise of the budget, the payments of the budget. We have the treasury modules with its account. We have the module of accounting, and we have the additional modules that are correlated to the systems, stock, inventory, payroll. And we also have a module of consolidation. In addition, all the entities that work or exercise government resources have the information online. Subnational agencies and companies have to upload in our module or website their information or reports. They send their consolidated financial reports to us through the system, and they've been doing this for years. The final outputs, our results are, as you, Andreas, explained, these are the results. These are the financial reports in conformity with the norm IPSASB with that format. In 2021, we had this. The reports are being audited by the Treasury of the state. All the financial reports are object of audit by the Treasury. And in 2020, we had our reports with positive scores. The financial balances are being analyzed or audited with the IPSASB formats and the Treasury and controllers. Now, we've worked in this analysis throughout the whole process. In this adaptation, and we're in conformity with the international standards, thanks to the allies that have supported us all along in the process. That's what I must declare regarding the process of convergence. Without the support of the BID, we would not have been able to achieve this. They facilitated the resources for our internship, for our training, they paid for the support or advice that we received from Andreas and his team. I'd like to thank the team of BID, Ms. Bianca Krauses, Riobo, Dugal, and others. I thank you all, members of the BID. Now, thank you so much, because we know that you're going to continue supporting us now that we're in the stage of processing the sustainability reports. We're going to be generating those reports in compliance with the new IPSASB norms. Andreas gave us those tasks that we must achieve by year 2023. Thank you for your permanent support. Now, Cintia, the word is yours, the floor is yours. I think I've run out of time. Cintia will explain all the process to you, everything that's correlatable to assets of the Ecuador as a nation. And she's going to be talking about the exercise of the nation's budget and the autonomy of the state. Cintia, please. Okay, have a great day. It's a pleasure for me to share with you this forum face-to-face, as Mayita just mentioned. I'll continue explaining my presentation and all the hard work that's been created from the National Directors of Public Assets. That's a department that works with the Treasury. It's been a long, hard work to conciliate, acknowledge, purge, and analyze the assets of the Ecuador. As you've heard before, in 2016 at the Ecuador, we were studying assets, inventory, leasing, investment instruments, and along those lines in the Ecuador, we worked well aligned. Each norm has its NTCG, that's a technical norm of government control, and we correlate it with an IPSASB. We're in conformity, as Magita said, we're aligned with the project. We've received scores regarding what we're doing with these international standards. In your screen, you see IPSASB 11. For me, it's an NTCG of stock, well known in finances at the Ecuador as what we have in existence. We changed it to stock. When we see IPSASB 13, for us, it's NTCG 10. That's correlatable to leasing. IPSASB 16 correlates to investment. And IPSASB 17, it's correlatable to the other column, and it's linked to NTCG 11. That's property assets plans. 12 is infrastructure assets. Norm 13, it's heritage artistic and cultural heritage. Number 17 is correlatable to projects and programs. We have the accumulated accounts and cost elements to study, and we're right now activating a project in correlation to assets or infrastructure assets. The norm 23 correlates to the subject of recovery of resources. That norm is there correlated to 17. We analyze the losses and recover the assets, even in the section of stocks in correlation to principal or cash. And I'll explain briefly what we do with NTCG. These norms are correlated to intangible assets, biological assets, wear and deterioration, concessions. We have a catalog of assets in stock here. As you know, we're operating with a tool that's the module of assets and inventory. We started using it since 2016. It was mandatory. In that instrument, we keep a record of all the assets that belong to the Ecuador. We have provisions or guidelines correlated to catalogs to use or study these types of assets. There's changes, and here are some of the basic changes in our accounts here. We had a norm. We need to build a long list or a catalog of the general accounts that's in compliance or aligned with the rest of the norms in the screen. You can see that we had to sort out the way we were going to keep record of each asset in their type. Group 13 has a subset of inventory, property, plant, equipment. That's group 14. Group 16. In Group 16, we have in our general account catalog the record of all the assets that are not yet object of a process of conciliation. We kicked off the process of conciliation. We have a balance or an amount, and we conciliate or cross-reference the data and acknowledge that in our financials reports. We cross-reference the amounts that are not yet object of a process of conciliation. In the asset account, we correlate the amounts in the original count, and the other process has to be kicked off. In Group 17, we have that. Group 18, you have properties of investment, biological assets. 19, intangible assets. 911 and 921 that have information of the accounts and their order. That information was updated back in 2020, 2021, along with Andreas. We have the support data to acknowledge the losses of assets and the process of recovery. Those are the other modules that are object of an update. In this process, we had to create instructions, manuals, guidelines for the end user because we're the guiding authority of observation of accounts. We're the guiding entity, and the guidelines are the instructions or manuals of adoption. The manual basically contains chapters, but in its chapters, in the body, in the chapter of goods and inventory, there's guidelines of how to conciliate the assets to the amounts, value or assessment. We spoke with the controller's departments, and Treasury had a list of records that was created in 2020, 2021. We're going to keep only the registered cost and its history, but in the process, the controllers asked us to revalue the types. The amounts that we correlate to physical assets or that are not correlatable to an asset, they have to be eliminated because the asset no longer exists. So we have to constitute a commission that determines whether there's a loss or an asset, and we have to draft the law that's in effect, that's positive law. The general controller of our government submitted this norm. It has to work along the lines of the other laws. We reclassify assets of infrastructure in the Ecuador. In our country, have a lot of public investment, and we have to see the exercise of this in the financial reports. Our objective is to accumulate all the accounts and entries, and we branch the data into many sectors: school, roads and highways. We need to know which asset we're working with. It's infrastructure. We correlate the types with the amounts, and that's part of our objectives, and it's an objective that's constant this year, 2022, 2023. We have audited, we have costs, we adopted the norms to analyze these costs. We're well related to market value, reasonable value criteria, and we determine how the assets have been affected. We consulted IPSASB. We have specific instruments, and we know that we have to build a robust law. The international law is dynamic. It's not static. It's alive. Latin American countries have to work and adapt to the process with the norms and this convergence. We have to adapt our norms depending on the process. There were some people feeling restless this morning, but we studied these subjects throughout the day. We're continue updating and adapting to the whole process, and we see the norms, and it's our mandate to analyze the assets that we have, and that will lead us towards the right place. Now, the main changes that we had in our norm in the segment of plant and assets, there's different criteria or types. In our laws, we have the classification of assets, production, management, administration. We speak about payments that we could capitalize with. We know that there's a depreciation of assets bought. We acknowledge and measure the cost, the devaluation. We see what happens with the assets. We consider all the OPEX or operational costs of our assets. Now there's administrative control, as I've told you, of all of this. We work hand in hand with other government agencies, such as the controllers. We have to draft criteria, parameters, guidelines to measure what's happening physically with the assets. There's other processes in which we have to eliminate certain assets. There's infrastructure. We analyze the log with Andreas and Durlandi. How do we keep track of things? And the leasing norm or that chapter or model is going to be analyzed again. We have to go through the amendment of that module. The infrastructure module is here. I want to explain the norm. In 2023, we have a lot of work to do. We're in a process of activation to study the modules and the norms. Our laws are uploaded in the ministry's website. You can see them there. We have the complete structure. We have the scope, acknowledgement, initial measurements, measurements after a specific process, and depreciation, devaluation. We have some assets, and we have the whole network of assets, and they're used for the public. You see the acknowledgement is the criteria. What's the market value? What's the OPEX cost of an asset? We have the analysis of costs of each programs. We have a cost accumulation balance sheet. We analyze the improvements of the asset, maintenance of the asset, retrofitting of the asset, and we analyze all of these components. Since 2012, we're working with this tool. That's the module in the system. In our system, we have the inventory. We feed the inventory. And this module was created in 2012, and it's compulsory since 2016. Our state authorities are analyzing the procurement process. We have adjustments, report creation, assessment of the value. The entities have to buy or exercise the budget and buy what they must. We have budgets and accounting entries. If the authorities or the governments will buy equipment, they have to correlate that with a budget segment that is there. In the Equator, we exercise the budget with what we need to buy with a specific segment or budget that was allocated for a specific procurement. And the entry has to be seen or mirrored in a specific account. We have to adjust. If there's an asset eliminated from the list, there's an accounting entry in our system. It's in the same system. The entry operates. It's in the system, but the systems interoperate. We have to assess the payroll also. We need to know who has custody of the assets, and we link this system to the Sprint system. They operate together with a third system, that's SIGEB, that's the payroll system, and with another system. We interoperate with all these systems and to know exactly who paid what. And we create the reports, bulk reports in our system, so you can know exactly how many assets are in record. There's vehicles, machinery being bought, so in the system we see how we all operate. I can see what was bought, where the accounting entry is, who has custody of the asset, and so on.
What is the current status? And I want to share it with you because for us it has been a very hard job in the management. But we started to reconcile around 40 billion, that is our accounting balance in assets. And nowadays we have recorded 13 billion, and that corresponds to 10 billion of assets, reconciling 10.79%. That is for assets. So from this year, we have included infrastructure assets and intangible assets. Our current job and our objective for 2022, 23, and 24 is the activation of infrastructure assets. In this slide, you can see that we monitor, even in the decentralized autonomous governments and provinces, councils, municipalities, churches, and public churches. And they are linked to the account 143, correspond to potable water systems, transportation systems, telecommunication system, and they have been activated in the gaps, that is, of national governments. But the main purpose, we see that they are linked 159.62, that are the 16 billion that are the costs to be distributed in each infrastructure. Corresponding the PG, that are entities of the public non-financial sector, operate in this tool. But I know how many hospitals are activated, what is the cost of each one of them, how many are depreciating, and even the useful life of each one of them. This objective needs to be taken to the decentralized autonomous governments. And for that, I have to tell you that this year started the consultancy with resources of the IDB in order to activate, classify, and recognize the infrastructure assets. The consultancy will finish this year, and the next year we will start the training process so that entities can apply the methodology and continue this progress. And, well, I have some minutes left. And for us, it's a pride to present this work in Focal. And thank you, Magita, because you have given us a lot of support, and thank you for the opportunity of sharing this job with all of you. Thank you very much, the team of Ecuador, for sharing your experiences. And thank you for all those that are connected digitally. We have received a lot of consultations, 20 questions, and there is a lot of interest in relation to fixed assets, property, plant, and equipment, and the experience of Ecuador. Due to the brief time we have, and as you know, yesterday we visited the National Palace, and one of the questions is related to that infrastructure. For the team of Kamira and Agustina, based on your opinion, what will be the best way to determine the value of the National Palace in Mexico City? Would you advise it to include it in the financial statements of the state? Excellent question. Let's begin. The first criteria will be, for the National Palace, there will not be a historical value, and so we will apply a current value. And we need to define if the National Palace is maintained due to the operational capacity or financial capacity. Maybe it is due to the operational capacity, and we will apply the current operational value. And that value allows us to implement three measurement bases. One, based on the market. The second is the replacement cost. But the main challenge in the patrimony of history, cultural, and art of a nation is because they are not replaceable, and so that will be difficult. And the third measurement basis will be the focus of revenues, that is, to bring to the present value the cash flows that can produce that asset. In some countries, and in the case of Italy, they have tried to do an experiment. They have tried to use the flows, cash flows. It has, Italy, a lot of historical assets, and they have done an experiment when they focus on revenues flows. Not only the revenue and that represent the number of tickets sold to people to go to a museum. No, it is only the revenues for indirect entries. And Italy is considering also the external flows in order to more or less estimate the value that can be assigned to historical, artistic, and cultural patrimony. It is not easy. IPSASB is still working to define these bases on the current operational value and do some tests in practice in order to see with what we can have best results. And that is what I can share with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kamira. There is another question related to the project of Standard 78. Have you considered the participation of evaluator experts in order not to confuse the measurement basis with other kind of basis of methods? Well, that question is included in the standard draft 77 of for measurement. We need to define how are you going to use the techniques in that standard draft. If you are going to hire an evaluator to define the correct value based on those techniques, then you must go to the standard 68. There, it says that you will use the current operational value or the reasonable value. And the standard draft 77 says that you need to explore the technique in order to determine the value. So the standard draft 77 refers you to the 78 to see the best practices and use the appraiser that can use all his knowledge that an accountant doesn't have. The third question, what is the difference between the replacement cost and the current operational value? Another excellent question. Precisely, IPSASB, many of the comments it received is to clarify the difference, because those countries that participated and sent their comments last year, when we proposed the definition of the current operational value, we also proposed an alternative vision, because some members didn't agree with that definition, and the alternative criteria, was the cost of replacement that everybody uses. So what we have decided in IPSASB is by introducing the current operational value and the reasonable value as measurement basis in the conceptual basis, we estimate the replacement cost. And so we still to define if the replacement cost will be the measurement technique inside the category will be at the lowest position, or we will take another measurement of alternation that was proposed last year as the current operational value. We are still working on that, and we will inform you about the progress the IPSASB is doing. Ecuador emphasized on the need for training the public servants, and there are two questions. How can be certified in NICSP the accountants of the countries? And can you say if it is needed to train the auditors of the general controllerships according to the standards adopted? In order to certify the public servants of the Undersecretariat, I remember that in the first focal in Chile, the multilateral bodies reached an agreement with CIFA, and they gave us certain positions per country. And that time, Ecuador got 6 positions, and the 6 colleagues were certified. Unfortunately, only we remain with Cintia and another. Then the IDB gave us support to certify 15 persons, but due to the turnover, we only have 6 of those people. And this year, with the support again of the IDB, and that's why I say that it has been a financial instrument of high value, well, it is supporting us to certify 22 colleagues with the support of Camila and Mr. Guion of Ecuador, because this process of certification this year was very productive, very fruitful, because we hired the company to prepare us to be certified. We had a course of 3 months where they prepare us in each of the standards and testing us and scoring us in every course that we took, following with the ACA certification process. And then they gave us a username for ACA certification, and then one was registered and one received the certification. Okay, 20 have been certified and 2 are just missing. They are giving us 6 months in order to be certified and give us 3 opportunities to achieve this certificate. And this is a process that I thank very much Camila and Thomas for their support, because they train us, and I also thank IDB for their financial support. And also the auditors were they trained on these standards? Well, the auditors know that we are in this process since a long time ago, and so they are preparing themselves. The certified colleagues are giving them courses on international standards to all these auditors. Okay, this is a job that takes time. Well, in the slide that I put, how has been the certification with public entities in Ecuador? Which were the main challenges? Well, the general budget state companies, as they use the same tool, and in the tool, many of the topics of the standards are included, well, the implementation for them is easy. For subnational governments, we have emphasized the relevance of being trained. In the pandemic, we focus on the municipal departments, provinces, churches to take the virtual training. And in certain times, we gave face-to-face training, taking all the safety precautions. And so now they have taken courses on the international standards. They have received Module 1 and 2, and the Module 2 talks about property, plant, and equipment. So they are now purging their accounts. And as the Secretariat of Finance is the leader of the public finance, and the Secretariat of Accounting issue is the standard, well, accordingly they have to apply the standard issued by the Secretariat of Economy and Finance. But the response has been good. The self-sustainable companies implement NIC, but also they upload the accounts by homologating it to other systems. We are going to close with 2 more questions. One is related to the purge of assets. What is doing Ecuador in order to purge the different spending to be reconciled in assets? Well, as I told you, right now we have 93.97% reconciled, but that difference of 7%, it will be in our currency, 1 billion pesos. So we talk with the general controllership entity. They impose sanctions. We as Secretariat of Economy do not impose sanctions. So we have recurred to the Secretary of Controllership and ask them to give agreements and reach a solution to entities. And they are balances from 2018 that we didn't have the tool, and we couldn't find physically the assets. So all the companies need standards to reduce the balance. The controllership, we have a period for auditing of 7 years, and we have seen if those non-existing balances can be reduced without producing future sanctions to entities. There are many assets that will not be located, and even the custodians have died or are not longer in those institutions. So it is not possible to recover the assets as a loss of resource. So we need to work with controllership to take the decision and see how we are going to manage the difference. It will not be the whole percentage, but a certain percentage. In many times we will not find the assets physically. Well, there is a last question due to the brief time. Thank you all for participating. And this question is for Kamira and Agustina. And do you have or will have IPSASB implementation guideline for the measurement of historical, artistic, and cultural assets as the support of Standard Draft 78? Well, that is a specific guideline. The guidelines are being developed, and then we will see if there is a specific guideline. In the measurement standard draft, we are considering which guidelines of measurement can be provided when we have patrimony assets. And right now, we see that it is a dynamic process, and maybe there will be one standard draft that can help the different jurisdictions to help them to implement the guidelines. So I will ask you to stay tuned. Thank you, Agustina. I thank the four speakers for this wonderful panel. You gave us a lot of information. We are taking a lot of lessons, and thank you for the exchange of experience. That's the main objective of VIII, and we are glad to meet you here. Thank you, the four speakers, and all of you for being so kind in paying attention. Thank you. And now, the chairman that will leave VIII this year will acknowledge the panelists for their outstanding participation in the 8th Forum of VIII.